The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Dyslexia 101. This is Ed Gruby, and I'm pleased to introduce our presenter, Kara Bratton, who is a Resource Center Director with Lutheran Special Ed Ministries. If you have questions during the presentation, I invite you to type them in the question box. You'll find that on your screen, probably off to the right side. And I'm not sure what your question box looks like. It probably says questions and it has a plus sign next to it. You click on that plus sign and it opens up a dialog box. You can type your questions in there and I will see them, and we'll try to get those questions in to Kara as we can and as appropriate. This session is being recorded and it will be in the LEA Webinar archives, accessible at lea.org under the Resources and Archives tabs. Illinois residents will get email from Concordia University Chicago regarding PDUs for this presentation. The rest of you, and well, all of you, will be getting a certificate from LEA about your attendance, which may be usable in your portfolios. So now we ask God to bless Kara and you during Dyslexia 101. Take it away, Kara.
All right, thank you, Ed, and thank you to everyone who's out there listening today. It's kind of weird to listen and not be able to see people. This is kind of a first for me. So, and I talk with my hands a lot, so I'm here gesturing and no one can see me. But I appreciate LEA putting on this webinar and asking me to talk about dyslexia tonight because I think it's such an important topic affecting so many children. And as Ed said, I'm the Resource Center Director for Lutheran Special Education Ministries. If you're not familiar with LSEM, we have been in ministry for 141 years. We work with schools and families and children all across the country in Lutheran and other Christian schools to help them receive services and, more than anything, hear the Word of God and know Jesus as their Savior, while also helping them with their educational needs. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in. And just to tell you, too, my interest in dyslexia started after my first year teaching as a Resource Center teacher in Fort Wayne, Indiana, which is where I live. After my first year as a resource teacher, I realized I had no idea how to teach kids who were struggling with reading, and I was the resource teacher, so I needed to figure that out pretty quickly. So I got hooked up with some Orton Gillingham training and really just developed a passion and interest in dyslexia, so that's just kind of spurred my own research and interest in, doing some tutoring of my own too. So on that note, to start off, we are going to go through and experience what a child with dyslexia might experience. So this is a dyslexia simulation. I've taken it from the website at the bottom of the page, pbs.org. They have some great simulations on different disabilities, different difficulties that kids face if you're interested in checking that out. So again, this might help you start to understand dyslexia and start to understand what a lot of kids in your classroom are going through when they struggle with reading. So if you look at this on the left-hand column, what we're going to use for this simulation, when you see those letters on the left, you're going to think of them as the letters on the right. So when you see a Q in your mind, you're going to pronounce it as a D or T sound, and so forth. So I'm going to give you a second to look at those. I want you to remember them because you're going to do some reading on your own on the next page, and you're going to need those sounds that I'm just teaching you. So make sure you get them all down in the next couple seconds, and then we're going to do some reading. Okay, so hopefully you've learned all your sounds now. And we're going to go on and try to read this passage. I'm going to give you about just a minute of dead air here, and go ahead and try to read that passage to yourself and use all those phonics skills we just learned and sound out all the words you have trouble with. I know not all of you are probably done reading, but we're going to move on because recess is in 10 minutes, so we have to get going here. All right. This is the translation of what you just read. If you remembered all those letters that were supposed to be different sounds, this is what that passage would have said. And I'm sure each of you individually had different levels of success. Some words you could probably figure out, maybe just one letter off, or you could figure out by context, and other phrases or sentences probably were a lot more difficult. So the purpose of this was really just to think about, and you can think about too even as a teacher, how frustrating was that experience, just to read that one little paragraph, to try to get through it, and then by the time you were done, also try to comprehend what you have read. If I were to ask you questions about what you read, would you have any clue how to answer them and things like that, and how much time it took as opposed to reading the passage like it is in the print you're familiar with. So as we go through the rest of the presentation, just kind of try to refer back to this experience and think of those kids in your classrooms who are going through that every time they see text on a page. And they are going through that 6 hours a day, and then they go through it at home when they're trying to do homework. So it's just kind of, again, an experience to refer to, so it kind of puts you in the mind of the kids that you're working with and who are struggling. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this kind of long definition, but I thought it is good to have a full definition of what dyslexia is. And this is taken from the International Dyslexia Association. And again, their website is at the bottom. They're another great resource. So just to read it, dyslexia is a specific learning disability that is neurological in origin. It's characterized by difficulties with accurate and/or fluent word recognition and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. These difficulties typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of language that is often unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities in the provision of effective classroom instruction. Secondary consequences may include problems in reading comprehension and reduced reading experience that can impede the growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. So I know that's a very long definition with a lot of educational jargon thrown in there. So the next couple slides, we're kind of going to break those down and break down some of the parts that I put in bold print to see, okay, what does this actually mean, and what are these students that experience dyslexia, what are they going to be showing you in the classroom? So just to go through some of the facts about what dyslexia is and what dyslexia is not, because there's a lot of misconceptions about what dyslexia truly is. So I'm hoping to address some of those here. So when that definition said dyslexia is an unexpected difficulty with reading, spelling, and writing, what they mean by the unexpected part is often children or individuals with dyslexia have either average to very high or above average intelligence. So that unexpectedness, you don't usually think of someone with an average or above average IQ as someone who's going to have difficulty with reading or spelling. But dyslexia, again, you often see kids with average to above average IQs that are the ones who have dyslexia. So the difficulty is unexpected. So on the other side, you'll see that dyslexia is not, it is not low intelligence. I know that's hard to wrap your mind around sometimes. I've argued with teachers that, are trying to tell me that the child in their class is, they can't read, so they must have a low IQ, and that is often, quite often, not the case. The next thing, dyslexia is a language-based learning disability affecting 15 to 20% of the population. So it is, like the definition said, a specific learning disability in the area of reading. Now when I say affecting 15 to 20% of the population, I realize that seems very, very high. That is the current statistic, and that's also taken into account because you'll see the bottom of that bullet point or the bottom of that chart says dyslexia is hereditary. What you see a lot of times is, dyslexia, just because you might say there's dyslexia in the bloodline, That doesn't mean that everybody in the family is going to be a poor reader, or they're going to be hit really, really hard to the point where they aren't able to read. Sometimes you see one generation of the family really, really struggle, or like a grandfather who really can't read. And then maybe the next generation, there's just some poor spelling, poor grammar, poor writing, that kind of thing. And then maybe the next generation, one of the grandchildren, again, really, really struggles with reading. So it's highly hereditary, and also that's where they get that 15 to 20%, because there's such a wide range of how dyslexia can affect individuals. Not all people who technically have dyslexia are going to not be able to read. There's a wide range there. The next part is a difficulty with phonological processing, and so again, I'm not going to go into a lot of the neurological research, even though I think it's interesting, but I know not everybody is a geek like me and likes that kind of thing. But it is a difficulty with phonological processing and neurological in origin in the brain. It's a lifelong difficulty. You'll see on the other side, it is not something to be cured or outgrown. That doesn't mean that students or individuals can't improve their reading, spelling skills, but dyslexia is not something that will go away. Most individuals will still have some lingering effects, even with really, really good remediation. It might just be that as they get older, they're going to be slow readers, slow at processing, things like that. But it is not something to be cured. No matter what you hear Tom Cruise telling you as he's jumping on couches, I've seen him say in interviews that Scientology cured him of dyslexia, and that's just not possible. So don't believe him. A couple of things to note on the other side. The biggest myth or misconception is that dyslexia is not a visual difficulty. It is not seeing anything backwards or seeing anything differently. And again, think back to that simulation we did at the beginning. It wasn't that you were seeing letters as other letters. It's that your brain's having trouble processing a Q as a D, or what other those substitutions were. It is not seeing things backwards. It's not reversing letters or numbers. Again, it's neurological difficulty with phonological processing. I talked about the low intelligence myth. It is also not a student being lazy, and if they just tried harder, they would be able to read. It's also not caused by parents not reading to their children enough when they're younger. Now, that's not to say that reading to your child when they're young is obviously a great thing, but that doesn't cause dyslexia. Okay, this next slide is taken from Sally Shaywitz's book, Overcoming Dyslexia. Which, if you are, a reader and you're really looking for a wonderful, wonderful resource, I would highly recommend getting a hold of this book and reading it multiple times. It's a wonderful book. But so her model, her take on dyslexia is this sea of strengths model, which I personally love because it just points out, like you'll see in the center, that decoding is quite often the biggest issue with children or individuals with dyslexia. They might not be able to read words, but look at all the things around here that they can do. So again, the sea of strengths. They're often, people with dyslexia are often very good with reasoning, critical thinking. Vocabulary is often quite strong. The children might not be able to read the words, but when they hear words, they can, understand higher level concepts. They're good at problem solving, general knowledge. Comprehension is often good. Now, again, comprehension might not always come for them through reading, because if they can't read it and they can't read it at a good pace, comprehension will be difficult. But oral comprehension is often good, or understanding concepts, that concept formation. So I like this model, again, because rather than focusing on all the things individuals with dyslexia have trouble with, there's so many strengths and so many good things to focus on. And I have so many other examples of this just with kids I've worked with who are so good with art, drama, electronics, music, sports, a lot of those right-brain things. And there's a lot of research that's been done and still being done about, again, with if you're nerdy like me, kind of those brain activations and how individuals with dyslexia a lot of times have high activation on the right side of their brain, even more so than an individual without dyslexia. So all those art, music, those kinds of things are often great strengths for those individuals. Just to give you one example, there's a student I tutored privately. He didn't go to a Lutheran school. I met him when he was in 8th grade, and he was reading at about a first grade level. And first of all, the school told him that that was about as good as he was ever going to read. There was nothing else they could do for him in 8th grade. He was just always going to be reading at a first, maybe second grade level at best. He was also, I got to know him because he competed in speed skating with my husband. And so that's kind of how I got to know him. I started working with him in reading, and now he just graduated from high school with a diploma. But the great thing about him, again, thinking about the sea of strengths, is he just made the USA World Speed Skating team as an 18-year-old. So as an 18-year-old, he has such strong athleticism, such strong skills in speed skating that, you know, he's now traveling the world and competing for Team USA as a speed skater. And I would often tell him, you know, that, okay, you have dyslexia, you struggle with reading, but look at this gift that you have, you know, that don't let the reading issues kind of overshadow some of these great things. And I think that's important for all kids and all families, to not let that overshadow some of the great gifts that they have, and to always be pointing those things out and building on their strengths. And again, that if you want to know more about that, that Overcoming Dyslexia has wonderful, wonderful information about that. The next thing I'm going to do is just go through some of the signs you might see. Kids in your classroom who, you know, might be struggling with dyslexia. And as we go through these, it's important to note that not all students with any or all of these difficulties are going to have dyslexia or have an official diagnosis. So don't take one of these items and say, oh, you know, Johnny Smith or, you know, Jane Smith has difficulty spelling, they must be dyslexic. And also, not all students with dyslexia will exhibit all of these signs. Just like with many disabilities and just in general, everyone with dyslexia is unique. They're going to show different combinations of these signs to varying degrees, and also that some of these things could pop up at different times during their education. You'll see some children in preschool and kindergarten that, you know, are having trouble rhyming. They can't learn their letters. There's so much going on, and you'll see those signs very, very early. But then you will see some kids who seem to learn how to read in kindergarten and first grade, and you think everything is good, and then maybe about second to third grade they hit the wall, because all of a sudden maybe they were really good at memorizing words, and then you get to about that second or third grade and vocabulary just goes through the roof, and you can't memorize as many words as what you need to. So all of a sudden some of these things become evident. So again, when I go through these signs, just understand they're all to varying degrees at different times, and not every person with dyslexia will have any or all of these. So first, difficulty with phonological and phonemic awareness. So again, young children, you see they have trouble rhyming. They have trouble telling you the first sound of a word, or you say a word and ask them to tell you the first sound. They have trouble with those kinds of things. Those things are difficult. Also, difficulty learning letters and their sounds, or, you know, they have it one day, don't have it the next. And obviously some of that is very common as kids are starting to learn. But that kind of constant, always having trouble with associating the letter with their sound, even after they've been taught it multiple times. Difficulty recognizing and remembering common sight words and words previously seen in text or in writing. So, you know, if they've seen the word cat, on every page in their book, and every time they get to the word cat, it's like they've never seen it before. They either can't remember, from page to page, from sentence to sentence, or even, again, back to remembering letters, and you think, we just saw this word, we just went through this, why aren't they getting it? So a lot of times you will see that. Students also often have trouble blending or segmenting sounds in words. So if you give them the word cat and to see if they can say k, a, t, and identify that cat has 3 different sounds and so on, or if they see cat in print, can they say k, a, t, and put that together? Often those skills are also difficult. Difficulty spelling, that is a huge one. You see a lot of that invented spelling that even carries on to 3rd, 4th grade. Kids leaving out vowels, just real inconsistent with spelling. Also difficulty organizing written and spoken language, and just an overall difficulty with fluent, accurate reading and oral reading. So even as kids get older, and you can do a lot to help the decoding and some of those specific skills, but sometimes their fluency, they still read very slowly, it's very choppy, without a lot of expression and things like that. The important thing to note with all these signs is if your school uses some kind of like a screener, like either like a Dibbles or an Ames Web, those good screeners that I'm familiar with look at all these skills listed and more as early as kindergarten and on, as appropriate for the grade level. And so those screeners are great because you don't have to wait until a child has already failed at reading. If you start seeing some of these signs and you start seeing some things through those assessments, just work on them with the kids, do some interventions. It's never too early to begin. You don't need, that old rule about, oh, we have to wait until 3rd grade or we have to wait until they've failed enough to start. That really just hinders the growth of kids. So much can be done if you're seeing some of these signs in kindergarten already. Start working on the phonemic awareness and all those things. And I can't stress enough how important those things are. Also, to keep going with some signs, kids often have difficulty memorizing number facts and other rote memory items. Just memory could be difficult. Now again, I've tutored some kids who their memory is just spot on for everything else, but if you ask them what 3 times 3 is, they can't remember that, but they'll remember everything else. Also pronunciation difficulties and difficulty with word retrieval. So if you have those kids, I had a kid I taught, and his birthday was February 13th, and he could never remember the name of the holiday his birthday was near. He was a 5th grader, and he's like, that holiday, the day that comes right after my birthday, he could describe everything about it. You give out cards, you give out candy, but he could not remember Valentine's Day. So that's kind of that word retrieval, where they understand the concepts, can verbalize the concepts, but to pinpoint that specific word is often very difficult.
Kara?
Yeah.
I do have a question here from Renee. She's asking, what if a child can't recognize the letters in her name? And I think this is probably referencing 1st or 2nd graders.
Yeah, and I would say it's very, very dependent on age. If it is 1st or 2nd grade, I would say that's pretty unusual to not be able to recognize the letters in their name. But I would also, again, don't use that one isolated thing as, okay, well, they must be dyslexic. I would look at some of these other skills. Okay, maybe they can't identify, but, how does that student do with sounding words out? Does the student know this, know different sounds connected with letters? My guess would probably be no if they don't know the letters in their name. But I would just, check other skills. Maybe do a screen like a Dibbles or an Ames Web or something grade appropriate. See how their other skills are. And then if you start to see this overall picture of, okay, they can identify letters in their name and they don't know their sounds and they can't rhyme and all these other things, then that's a a strong indication that, okay, we need to work not only on the letters in their name, but we need to work on phonemic awareness, sounds of letters, and things like that. So I would try to look beyond just that one skill, but I would say that's definitely unusual for first or second grade and something to, again, look a little deeper into. And hopefully that answers your question, and if not, feel free to, to ask more. But also difficulty remembering spoken directions or the names of people and places, difficulty with sense of direction, and that could again be like left-right confusion, things like that, difficulty with sequences, and just an overall inconsistency with reading or spelling. Just like I said, with reading, you might see a word over and over and not identify that word on different pages. Same thing with spelling. They might spell the word where 10 different times, or I'm sorry, 10 different ways, and on 10 different occasions. So it's just that big inconsistency.
Hey, Kara,
Yeah.
we have a question from Debbie. She says, who can make the determination of who is dyslexic? If a teacher sees many of these signs, what is the next step for a diagnosis?
Okay, and that's a perfect question because the next slide is dyslexia diagnosis. So the timing of that question was great. I always say go to a professional. Even myself, with experience I've had with dyslexia, I might kind of know in my heart and feel like, okay, I really think the student is dyslexic. That leave that up to a professional, whether that's an educational psychologist, someone from the public school system. We have a very, very good neuropsychologist in town who will diagnose specifically dyslexia. He won't say just a reading disability, he'll say dyslexia. But noting all of those signs, those things you notice about the student, either if you talk to a parent or write them down in some way. If you know that a family is going to go to a psychologist or they're going to be tested, make sure you do document those things because that information is very helpful as a professional does go through the diagnosis. And I say that the diagnosis, I feel, is not important in terms of I want to know if my child is dyslexic. For the purpose of having a label, and you hear parents say, well, I don't want my child to be labeled. And to me, that's not the purpose of going through a formal evaluation. Like that one slide, showed that, dyslexia is, a few weaknesses, but there's all these other areas of strength. And those areas of strength and how the child learns best, those things are going to be discovered as the child goes through an individual evaluation. And the psychologist, the neuropsychologist, they can go so much deeper than a resource teacher or classroom teacher really can. And they might reveal strengths that these students have that you would have never even thought. So again, I don't think the diagnosis is. I don't recommend people go through the process of testing for the label, but to find out more about how the student learns and the strengths that the students have. And I put on here too, the evaluation typically includes intellectual and academic tests. So again, a lot of times they will look at IQ, which is kind of an interesting thing to see too, because a lot of times that IQ is average to above average. It also focuses on language skills. I know like our neuropsychologist in town, he has a specific dyslexia screener that in combination with these other tests, truly tell him if the child is dyslexic or if it's something else. And again, the evaluation is important to understand the unique strengths and weaknesses of a student to help you at the school, the teacher, parents, everybody develop a plan for the student based on their individual needs and not just create a label and kind of lump them together with, all the children who are dyslexic. So hopefully that answers that question too.
Sorry about that picture creeping in. I hit the wrong button. We do have two other questions here. One from Jill.
Okay.
If someone is diagnosed with dyslexia, would it be labeled under OHI for other health impaired? It doesn't qualify under specific learning disability, does it?
It should qualify under specific learning disability, and in saying that, I know that that is the case in Indiana. I know every state approaches it a little bit differently, so I don't want to tell you a for sure. I know in some states, like in Texas, they will specifically have dyslexia and not even say specific learning disability. They have dyslexia as a category. But, the thing, too, is some students, a lot of students might have like ADD or ADHD in combination with dyslexia, and then, whoever's done the testing may make that determination of which is affecting them more, and they might qualify under OHI if like attention is also an issue. But for the most part, dyslexia is considered it's a specific learning disability, so most students do qualify that way.
Okay, and then we have two questions that kind of go together, one from Ruth and another from Rachel. Can a 4 or 5-year-old be diagnosed, or is that too early to have it completed? And the other question, can a child at any age be diagnosed with dyslexia?
At age 4 or 5, again, they can be exhibiting some of those signs. It's very hard I think it's hard at that age to really say for sure if it's dyslexia. And I'm going by the experience of working with the neuropsychologist we have in town. He will test kids that young, but he typically will come back and say, like, I'm fairly confident it could be dyslexia. However, the student is very young, and he would recommend reevaluating when they're maybe 6 or 7 and maybe have had a little more schooling. So I think it's possible. Again, some psychologists might hesitate to do that. But if you are having issues with getting a formal test, I would again go back to some kind of assessment and just assess their specific skills, how they're doing with phonemic awareness, and just work on those specific skills that they're struggling with, no matter what the diagnosis is, or if they are too young to be tested at that age 4 to 5. Otherwise, I think from age 6 on, really they could be diagnosed. And again, if you're getting an evaluation from the school system, depending on your state where you are, a lot of times they will not specifically say dyslexia. They might say there's a reading disability or specific reading disability. And to some parents, it's very important to know if that's dyslexia or not. I know in Indiana, if you want that term, you kind of have to go to a private evaluation. So, all right, and I know I'm talking way longer than what I wanted, because I want to get to the stuff that I know everyone does want to know about, things like the classroom accommodations and what can we do for students with dyslexia. So I'm just going to let you, briefly look through these quotes. Again, I took these from Sally Shaywitz, hopefully to address some of the issues, because some of the things I hear when you talk about accommodations are, well, that's not fair. It's not fair to do this for one student and not all of them. And, is giving them extra time, is that really, again, that's giving them an advantage. And it really isn't. And hopefully, reading through some of these quotes help convince you of that. If you read through her whole book, I don't think there's any way you can read that book and come away thinking that that giving students additional time and giving them accommodation really gives them an advantage. It really just levels the playing field. And in her second quote, the very end, it says, by themselves, accommodations do not produce success. They are the catalyst for success. So again, they just kind of level the playing field so the student can be successful, so the student can use the skills they have to be successful. And so I'm going to kind of get into some of these accommodations, and then also some strategies that hopefully you can even try in your classrooms. So extended time that's a huge accommodation that's so important. And as the teacher, you kind of have to understand and be okay with the fact that a student with dyslexia is probably not going to get the same amount of work done in the same amount of time. So you might have to pick and choose which questions you want them to do, which assignments you want them to do. You know, and again, think about what's the most important thing for them to get out of that particular assignment. You know, I have a real issue with students being penalized for needing additional time by saying, okay, well, I'm going to have Johnny stay in for recess because he didn't get his test done, or I'm just going to send it home for that student to finish. And there's nothing wrong with sending things home, but again, you have to think those assignments take longer for kids with dyslexia to begin with. So they're going to have that to take home on top of all the other work that's still going to take them longer. And you know, that always brings up the question, okay, well, how much time do you give them? How much extended time is enough? I know for standardized tests, you know, they typically say time and a half. However, I mean, that's really just a standardized thing, but each student is going to be different. There's some students with, you know, an assignment in your classroom, they might need less than time and a half, they might need more than time and a half. So, you know, really try to get to know the student, see how much time they really need. But also, you know, if homework is taking them 3 to 4 hours, you know, then you really have to weigh the benefit of, okay, is it really worth them spending this much time, or are they just really being driven crazy by this, and do I need to shorten the assignments, or say, okay, you work on this for half an hour, and whatever you get done in half an hour, as long as you've worked hard, that's good. So again, extended time, it's hard to say, but it is crucial that individuals with dyslexia do have the extended time. Also, recorded text, especially as students are, you know, 3rd grade and above, and that content area gets so heavy. Reading all that text becomes so laborious for students. It takes so long, and then there's also just not a whole lot of brain space left for comprehension. So recorded text, like through Learning Ally. Learning Ally is formerly Recordings for the Blind and Dyslexic. You know, again, that offers books on, you know, CD. Also Bookshare, bookshare.org. I have that in my resource. I have links to these in my resource section. That individuals with dyslexia, they can get a free account, or their parents can get them a free account, and again, they can download text onto their computer so that they can be read out loud to them. And then also, you know, if the student has an iPad, and again, Bookshare, there's an app that can go with it, so you can download text onto the iPad, but iPad also has those accessibility features that will read text out loud. And as text is being read out loud, you know, I still encourage the student to try to follow along, so they're getting that visual while also hearing it. But a lot of times, hearing that text, again, it exposes them to the content, exposes them to that vocabulary, which a lot of times they're very capable of understanding, even if they can't read it or read it fluently. Also, alternate test formats and tests read out loud. And I put 2 apps behind here if you have iPads, iPods. The one is VoxDocs or Prismo. What those 2 apps do, the VoxDocs, you can either take a picture of like a test or an assignment, or you can upload it if you have it, you know, as a file on your computer, and then the app will read it out loud to a student. So if you're giving a test, and you know, you have an iPad, and you can set the child with dyslexia up in the back with their earbuds. You know, you've scanned it into VoxDocs, and it can read the test out loud to them. Or have, you know, if you have a teacher aide, or even yourself, or somebody that can read that test to the student. Because again, otherwise you're testing their reading skills, not testing how well they know content. Also, alternate test formats. A lot of times I would see my 7th and 8th grade social studies teachers, and they would have, you know, like 20 items in the matching section. And so there's 20 items that student has to constantly read through and then try to match it with the 20 on the other side. You know, usually that, you know, 4 to 5 kind of group those matching items in groups of 4 to 5 works best. There's not, you know, not as much reading, not as much kind of going through and things like that. Also, fill in the blanks. are very hard because of that word retrieval issue. So if you could provide a word bank where the student has some choices instead of just blindly coming up with the word, that's very difficult. Also with like essay questions or longer writing questions, this next thing, if students could dictate their responses either to someone who could write it for them, or Dragon Dictation is a free app that the student just speaks into. It will type out what they say. They can go back in and edit it, and then they can either email it or print it. So anytime there's a longer assignment or an essay, again, if you're really testing content and does the student understand the content, allow them to dictate those type of things rather than laboriously trying to write all of that out. That often takes a long time. Also recording lectures. Notability is a really good app, allows them to record and also kind of take notes on their own. The other thing that's really helpful is class notes or study guides given by the teacher. Because students often can understand what they hear, they can understand the vocabulary, but then if they're trying to listen to the teacher and try to write things down, first of all, by the time they get home, they're not going to be able to read their writing. And so they're going to get frustrated because they spent all this time trying to write it, they can't read it, and their parents can't read it. And it also takes their focus away from listening to the teacher and trying to gain content that way. So even if you give like a skeleton outline of notes and the student has to listen and fill in a couple words to make sure they're keeping on track, that would be good. Spelling list modification, classroom spelling lists can just really be difficult. I've seen second grade lists where it's like, okay, this list is all the long E this week. Well, okay, long E might be able to be spelled 6 to 8 different ways. So throwing that all onto one list at one time is just a nightmare for a student who has trouble spelling. So if you have a list like that, not only reducing the list, but really looking at, okay, say it is 6 ways to make the long E in one list. Can we just give the student all the words with EA so they start to see a pattern and so they can focus on those things? So that's another thing to think about with spelling list modification. And I apologize because I'm really trying to go through these fast because I know I'm running out of time. All right. Some specific strategies, and I'm taking all these strategies from the Orton-Gillingham methodology. And hopefully some of these things that are easy, or, simple enough to implement or try to implement even without being trained in that methodology. The first is finger tapping for spelling. And you'll see I have 2 little pictures. One is a hand with the 1, 2, 3, or the other is, it looks like the sign language hand, but it's actually someone tapping their fingers to their thumb. This is a great activity for, and actually all these are great activity for all students, not just those students struggling. They're going to help reinforce these skills for everybody, and the kids who are doing well, you can always amp it up and try some harder level skills. But so the finger tapping for spelling, I always would make my students do this before they were even allowed to pick up a pencil and write down the word. So say we're spelling the word cat. What the student would do is, if you're looking at that picture with the hand, they would put their fingers down and isolate each sound and say each sound as they tap their finger, or tap each finger to their thumb and say k, a, t. And if they do that correctly, then I would allow them to try to spell the word. If they can't do that correctly, if they can't say k, a, t, chances are they're not going to be able to spell that word. So if they would make a mistake in tapping sounds, then I would stop them there and correct the finger tapping, and we'd go through the finger tapping together. And then once they can finger tap, allow them to try to spell it. Also, if you're doing multi-syllable words, just have the student do 1 syllable at a time. If you're trying to spell the word fantastic, okay, by the time that child tries to isolate each sound and then go back and try to remember, it's a nightmare. So if you do fantastic and do fan, and even just have that student write that first syllable. Okay, now what was the next syllable? Tas, ass, as they're tapping their fingers. Write that syllable. So just breaking those bigger words down to one syllable at a time. So again, if you have a child who doesn't really struggle, try challenging them with some of those multi-syllable words, see if they can figure out one syllable at a time. So that's kind of with the finger tapping. The next thing is sound cards and blending. And again, this might seem kind of elementary. So, you know, for third grade above, if you're not really working on the phonics skills, it's still great for students with dyslexia, but I understand some of your other students, this might be more of a small group thing or a one-on-one thing if you're able to do that with students. But having either like a deck of cards with either just the ABCs on it, if that's kind of the level you are at with your student, or, you know, the students, if they're working on vowel teams like A, I, E, A, you know, throw those in there. The first thing I would do with those is just go through, shuffle the deck, go through, show the student the letter, and see if they can produce the sound. So just kind of go through the deck. It's a great review. Again, the purpose is supposed to be easy. It's supposed to be things the student has already learned and they can easily kind of review. Then the next step is kind of like you'll see in this picture where they're working on blending sounds together. So you can divide those letter cards into piles. The vowels always go in the middle. And like if it were this one, again, cat, the student would be looking at that, point to each card and say the sound. So say k, at, and then try to blend it together and say cat. You know, again, cat is a pretty easy example. But then, you know, you flip some cards, you make another word. The great thing about this is nonsense words will come up a lot. And that is a great thing for students who struggle. It can also be a great thing for students who seem to read very well, because it forces them to use phonics. It forces them to use those skills you're trying to teach them. It really separates the kids who are more the word callers or the word memorizers from kids who really can use those skills. So those, and each of those things, the review of the cards and blending, just a couple minutes. It's not a laborious thing. You don't spend 10 minutes on nonsense words. Just, I mean, really like 2 to 3 minutes total for all of that. But again, that blending really helps students practice the skills you're trying to teach them. The next thing is syllabification, and try to say that word 3 times quickly. But teaching kids, again, to divide words into syllables. And the resource I put on the right side of the page is from OrtonGillingham.com, the Fantastic Syllable Division Word Book. It costs $20. It's an awesome resource. It teaches you as the teacher how to divide words into syllables, because what I would see a lot of is, you know, if the student, a lot of times when you talk about syllables, you're talking about how the word sounds. Like, okay, say the word elephant, how many syllables is that? Well, that's easy to do if you already know what the word is. For kids with dyslexia, they don't know what the word is, so how in the world are they supposed to know how many syllables it is, and how in the world are they supposed to know, you know, sometimes you can go by sound to know where to divide words into syllables, but again, if you don't know the word, you're kind of really stuck. So just the whole idea of how kids can learn patterns to know where to divide words, and that enables them to read multi-syllable words. And again, for your kids who are, you know, maybe in 1st or 2nd grade and, oh, they've got those basic skills down, okay, well, try giving them 3 or 4 syllable words as a challenge, and they can still apply the same strategies. And again, it would take a while to go through all the syllable division patterns and how to teach it, but again, that's a great resource. You can also probably find some things online about teaching syllable types and syllable division patterns. The next thing on here is red words or non-phonetic words, and this is probably my favorite strategy. I love this one. It's kind of hard to see in the picture maybe, but basically this is for words that the kids can't sound out. You obviously don't want to encourage kids to try to sound out a word like does, because you're just gonna have a mess, and you're gonna have kids frustrated because you're teaching them to do something that's not going to produce the correct word at the end. So I don't know if you can see in the picture, what you do for a word like that to teach a student who's struggling is you have the word written in red on the card, and you're holding it out in your non-dominant hand. So, you know, I'm right-handed, or the individual in the picture is right-handed too, so she's holding the card in her left hand, putting her right hand on her shoulder. What you would do is say the names of the letters, not the sound. So like if the word was does, you would say D-O-E-E, I'm sorry, I can't spell it right, D-O-E-S spells does. As you're saying each letter name, you're tapping down your arm, and then when you say the whole word, you're kind of sweeping down your arm, says does. And then you have the student practice that multiple times as they're learning the word. Then for review, if you're going through the words the student already knows, and they get stuck, say they get stuck on the word does, which happens a lot, instead of you saying, no, Johnny, remember that's the word does, tell them to hold it in their hand and arm tap it. And a lot of times that tactile, that kinesthetic of saying D-O-E-S triggers their brain, and they're like, oh, does. And you won't believe me until the first time that you've taught kids that way, and the first time that happens, you'll be like, oh, wow, it really does work. Now, again, it doesn't work all the time, but the more the student practices that way, the more that will trigger the word. And again, they just need a different strategy for those non-phonetic words, because the phonetic things you're hopefully teaching them how to sound out. The last specific strategy is an auditory practice. Again, this picture is taken from OrtonGillingham.com. They, sell these things called sensational sand, but you can use just any kind of sand in sand trays, or shaving cream, anything tactile, sandpaper. And what you can do with auditory practice, I a lot of times would do this, before we did spelling, where you're saying a sound, like, okay, the sound is k, and the student repeats k, and then they would write the letter in the sand or shaving cream, whatever, that says k. Now, again, let's sound like k. They might know the C. They could also write K as many ways as they know. So as you get into some of those trickier vowel teams as they get older, like, okay, the sound is A. Well, they might know 4 ways to make the long A sound, so they would write all 4 of those. Again, just a quick little drill to, again, just keep reinforcing some of those basic phonics skills. So those are some strategies that you as a classroom teacher could try. I know I had to go through those very quickly, so feel free to please email me for more details, or check out a resource like OrtonGillingham.com. Overall, the dyslexia remediation, it's a little more difficult to just do in a general education setting, beyond some of those strategies, beyond providing accommodations. Dyslexia remediation should be something multisensory, explicit, and systematic phonics. That's what students with dyslexia are lacking and have trouble with, and that's really what they respond to and what they need. It's amazing once you start, like once I started Orton Gillingham, it's amazing what the kids remember. They love those rules, like CK comes at the end of a one-syllable word right after a short vowel. You wouldn't think that they're going to remember things like that, and they do. And it's kind of like they thrive when they have rules they can follow, and patterns they can follow. So all of that, while it might seem like overkill to individuals who never had trouble reading, those are the things that the kids with dyslexia need. I also listed some things that are based on Orton Gillingham, Wilson reading, the Barton system, alphabetic phonics. All of those things are very, very good. Now, in saying that, I don't want to say, well, go by the Wilson reading program and, all your prayers will be answered, those kids will be readers. Training in any of those systems is really the best thing. Or if you have a resource teacher or something like that, that training is so important because it teaches you so much about reading yourself. And I also put at the very bottom the Children's Dyslexia Centers. There are different locations around the country. You can find those at that website, childrensdyslexiacenters.org. That's where I received my training. They offer free tutoring to students with dyslexia, and they use the Orton-Gillingham method. I know our one in Fort Wayne closed within the last couple of years. I know there's still others around the country. So if you're looking for a good place to refer families to, trying to find a good tutor, good remediation, obviously anyone who is an Orton-Gillingham tutor would be awesome, but also looking into those children's dyslexia centers is wonderful because they are free. A lot of times they do have a waiting list, but they are free and wonderful. Also, a website for you as teachers to check out is the Florida Center for Reading Research. They have student center activities at that website, and they have it broken down by grade level, like K to 1, 2 to 3, 4 to 5. And sorry if you teach above 5th grade, I don't think they have anything for you. But then they also break it down into phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, fluency, comprehension. And then within each of those categories, you can pick activities, and they have everything you need for that activity ready to be printed out, and you can color it if you want and things like that. It's not a curriculum, but it's great if you have some time to do small groups or center activities. You can maybe be working on some of those skills that the kids need. And again, I know not a whole lot of time to spend on remediation, but like I said, it is such a specialized thing. It's a little bit harder to integrate. So trying to find someone who's trained in some of these dyslexia remediation things could really be the best thing for students. My last couple slides are just some resources. And before you frantically try to write all these down in the 3 minutes we have left, I'll flip through to the last slide because and that's just this slide is, again, resources, but overcoming dyslexia. There's also a very, very good movie called The Big Picture, Rethinking Dyslexia, that's just out within the last couple years. It also has the kind of main star of the movie is this boy getting ready to go to college named Dylan, and he's actually Robert Redford's grandson. So it's kind of interesting, and Robert Redford had a big role in that, or on the back end directing and producing that kind of thing. So it's a good one to check out. But again, if you see the website I have here on our LSEM website, the loosebed.org /blog/post/dyslexia-101, if you go to there, that will give you, you can download this whole PowerPoint with my notes on it. And again, if nothing else, just to look at the resources that I know you didn't have time to write down. So you can go there. Also, please feel free to email me or call me, text me. My email is there, kbratton@loosebed.org, or my phone number. I'm happy to either email you a copy of the presentation, answer any questions you have, either just about LSEM services we provide, or more questions about dyslexia, or anything else, or specific questions you have after this presentation about, oh, I have a question about Johnny in my classroom. What can I do for him? I think he has some of these signs, things like that. I'm very, very happy to help with individual questions about students also. And I know we are about out of time, but I'm still willing to answer any questions. I don't know, Ed, if there are any more coming in.
Yeah, there's a few more, and I typed answers back saying that you would leave your email and they could contact you, but let's get a couple of them in. Specifically this one from LaDonna, who says SWR, Spell to Write and Read, is an excellent program by Wanda Sanseri, similar to Orton-Gillingham, that teaches phonograms to students, and she found it to be an excellent resource for reading and writing.
Oh, okay, great. I have actually not heard of that one, so I'll definitely be checking that out too. Yeah, and there are so many. Again, if you just want to look for that, based on Orton-Gillingham, that's an important component. But it's always good to know more too.
Okay, and then Carrick says, are there any more apps similar to VoxDocs out there?
The other one I had there was Prismo. Prismo is more the picture-taking app that kind of converts it to a Word document, and then you kind of turn on your accessibility feature to read the Word document. Those are the two that I'm familiar with and I've used. There probably are others out there, but I don't have experience with them or know enough about them to recommend any.
Okay. Well, I know we're at time, but I'm going to squeeze a few more in if you don't mind, Kara.
No, that's fine.
This question came up about 15 minutes ago, actually. Is it best for the student to practice reading a passage silently or out loud with another adult before reading the passage out loud to the class?
I would say probably a little of both. Some of it depends on the comfort level, I would say, of the student. They're obviously going to feel more comfortable reading it in their head. What I would often do is have them practice it in their head, but for their own sake too, maybe have them practice reading it out loud to somebody before they read it to the class, because so many students, they might think they read it correctly in their head when really they didn't, or they missed they missed some of the key words. So I would say try to have them read it out loud, just if you feel it's going to save them an embarrassment of, especially older kids, an embarrassment of misreading something in front of everyone. But I'd say some of that too depends on the individual student.
Okay, Susan, we hope that helps you. And Whitney had a question. If dyslexia is not backwards letters or numbers, then what is it? What is it a sign of, or what is it called when students consistently write letters and numbers backwards?
And that can be a sign of dyslexia, but the issue is not that they are seeing it backwards. That's not why they might be mistaking a B for a D or writing a P for a Q. Again, it's not a visual thing. If that's, again, kind of like someone asked a question earlier about, identifying letters in the name, if that's the only thing a student is doing, that can actually be fairly normal up to about age 7 or 8 to reverse B's and D's and things like that. If that's the only thing the student is doing, I wouldn't be as concerned. But if you see the student doing that, then again, I would look at some kind of assessment or dig a little deeper and see, okay, do they know their sounds for letters? Do they have some of these phonemic awareness skills and basic skills? And if they don't, and they're doing these, seemingly writing things backwards or, mistaking letters for each other, then those can be indications of dyslexia. And really all it is even though it seems like they're reversals or visual things, it's just in how their brain is processing, and the brain for individuals with individuals with dyslexia does not process efficiently, and so they might see the B, and instead of their brain automatically recognizing that as a B, their neurons are jumping all over the place trying to figure out what this letter is, and it takes a lot of time, and it's a very inefficient process, so they end up mistaking it for a D or things like that. But it's not that they're seeing it wrong, it's that their brain is not processing it correctly or efficiently.
Okay, and one more question. Any hints for kids that can segment words out slowly, but when they re-say the word, they say it backwards?
Okay, I'm trying to think. So they segment it, but say the word backwards?
Yeah, they segment words out slowly, but when they re-say the word, they say it backwards.
To be honest, off the top of my head, I'm not sure about that one. Maybe whoever asked that, maybe send me an email with kind of maybe a more specific example to kind of see. The only thing I could think of is, again, if you're thinking of an example like cat, obviously probably a more difficult word than that, and they're segmenting k, before you get them to repeat the word, just see if they can go back and do k, and then write the letter that makes the k sound, write what letter makes the sound, right, what letter makes the t sound, and then see if they can blend those sounds together once they have it written down. That's the only thing I can think of off the top of my head, but again, please feel free to email me because I might not be totally understanding the situation correctly.
Okay, Debbie, so you can email her, and any of you can email Kara with your questions. She's expressed her willingness to answer. Elizabeth ends up by saying, how can LSEM help my school? Is there a publication that you send out?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there's numerous ways we could help your school. We do offer different newsletters that are free, and I promise if you sign up for one of our newsletters, that's all we're going to send you. We offer e-newsletters for educators, which are kind of geared more toward general education teachers. All these newsletters are quarterly, so they're on different topics. Actually, the one that just went out was on dyslexia, and that was our newsletters for specialists, which are geared more toward resource room teachers or teachers outside of just the general education classroom. We also offer a newsletter for parents, which I encourage teachers to sign up for and either forward to parents of kids you teach or print them out and give them to parents. Again, on relevant special ed topics. We also offer one for Christian stewards, which is geared more toward church workers, Sunday school teachers, DCEs, pastors, those kinds of things. And again, you can either sign up on our website, which is up there, loosefed.org. You'll see a thing on the main page to sign up for our newsletters, or email me, and I can let you know more about those newsletters. And also email me too if you want to know, about LSEM programs, if you think your school might want an LSEM program, or even just professional development or a consultant to come in, that kind of thing. I can tell you, more specifically about what services we might offer if you email me.
Okay, well, that's enough overtime for this evening. Kara, again, thanks very much for spending your time and your expertise with us this evening. Thanks to all of you out there who participated in this webinar. It's a very special thing to teach in a Lutheran school, and many of us are thankful that you do that. So God bless you all. And any final words, Kara?
No, just thank you all again for logging on this evening, and hopefully the information was helpful, and thank you, Ed, for putting this together.
It was a pleasure for LEA to offer this, and again, God bless you and good night.